Tom Cruise notices a homeless mother with baby living in a car. And what he does will shock you. The streets of Los Angeles had a way of swallowing people whole. The glitz, the glamour, the flashing lights of Hollywood. None of it reached the forgotten corners where dreams faded into cold nights and empty stomachs. Tom Cruise had seen it all. From the blinding cameras on red carpets to the lonely silence of a trailer after a long shoot. But no matter how much fame he had, he never lost sight of the world beyond the spotlight. He often took late-night drives alone without his security, just to clear his mind. That's when he saw them. A woman, curled up in the driver's seat of an old beaten-up sedan. Her hair was messy, her face pale with exhaustion. In the back seat, wrapped in a thin blanket, was a baby, no older than 6 months. Tom pulled into the gas station across the street, pretending to check his phone while stealing glances at the car. The woman had her arms folded across her chest, her breath fogging up the window. She looked lost in thought, her eyes hollow. Something about the scene struck him deep. Maybe it was the fact that he had kids of his own. Maybe it was the way she held herself, like someone who had given up but couldn't afford to stop trying. He watched as she hesitated before stepping out of the car. She was wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, her hands tucked into the sleeves for warmth. She walked toward the gas station, her steps slow, hesitant. Tom followed her inside, keeping a respectful distance. She went straight to the coffee machine, poured a small cup, then stood there, staring at the cash register. Her fingers trembled as she dug through her pockets. A handful of coins. She counted them twice, her lips moving as she did the math. Tom glanced at the cashier. The young man behind the counter looked unimpressed, chewing gum as he tapped on his phone. The woman took a deep breath, placed the cup back on the counter and whispered, "I'm sorry." She turned to leave. That was the moment Tom stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said casually, reaching for the coffee cup. "You forgot this." She turned, startled, her eyes meeting his. For a brief second, she didn't recognize him. Just another stranger in a hoodie and baseball cap. I didn't pay for it," she stammered. "I got it," he said, already handing cash to the cashier. "And whatever else you want." The woman hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. But the way Tom spoke, so effortlessly kind, so normal, made her exhale a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom nodded, but something inside him told him this wasn't over. Not yet. The woman took the cup of coffee, cradling it between her cold fingers, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She blew on it gently, her eyes flickering with something between relief and shame. Tom noticed the way she held herself, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing for disappointment. She looked exhausted, not just physically, but in a way that spoke of years of struggle. He watched as she took a slow sip, savoring the warmth. For a moment, she was just a woman enjoying a simple kindness. But then reality hit. Her eyes darted toward the parking lot, toward the old car with fogged-up windows where her baby lay sleeping. "You okay?" Tom asked, keeping his voice soft. She looked at him, hesitating. It was clear she wasn't used to being asked that question. Or maybe she was used to people asking, but not really caring about the answer. "I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." Tom nodded, but he wasn't convinced. He could see the way her fingers trembled slightly, how her clothes, though clean, were worn and frayed at the edges. The exhaustion in her eyes wasn't just from lack of sleep. It was the kind of exhaustion that settled deep into a person's bones, the weight of carrying too much for too long. "Is that your car out there?" he asked casually, as if it was just small talk. The woman tensed. "Yeah. Your baby's inside?" Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. She shifted on her feet, glancing toward the door as if debating whether to leave. "She's sleeping." Tom could tell she was being careful. Maybe she thought he was judging her. Maybe she was used to people assuming the worst. "She okay?" he asked. The woman swallowed, her throat moving with effort. "She's fine." She wasn't fine. Tom knew it. The baby might be safe for now, but no child should have to sleep in a car, exposed to the cold, to hunger, to uncertainty. A long silence stretched between them. The woman shifted again, gripping the cup like a lifeline. "Look, I appreciate the coffee," she said, forcing a polite tone. "But I should go." Tom could have let her. He could have let her walk out that door, get into that car, and drive off into another uncertain night. But something about this moment wouldn't let him. "Wait," he said, before he even knew what he was going to say next. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the door handle. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman exhaled, as if answering that question took more energy than she had left. "Rachel," she said finally. Tom nodded, letting the name settle in his mind. "Well, Rachel," he said, choosing his next words carefully, "I think you and I need to have a real conversation." She stiffened, her guard going up again. And just like that, the real story was about to begin. Rachel's grip on the door handle tightened. She had been through enough in life to know when someone was just being polite, and when they were prying. "I really should go," she said, her voice edged with unease. Tom could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of what kindness might cost her. People like Rachel didn't expect help anymore. They had been disappointed too many times. "I get it," he said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I don't want to overstep. But let me at least get you something to eat before you go. For you and your baby." Rachel hesitated again. It was obvious she was hungry. She'd been sipping that coffee like it was the only thing keeping her standing. And she had a baby in that car. She couldn't afford to be prideful. Finally, she gave a small nod. "Okay, just something small." Tom turned to the cashier. "Get her whatever she wants. And throw in some baby formula if you have it." Rachel's eyes widened slightly, and she opened her mouth as if to protest. But Tom gave her a reassuring look. "It's okay," he said. "Really?" She hesitated a moment longer, then slowly walked to the small food section of the gas station. She picked up a prepackaged sandwich, a banana, and a bottle of water. Tom could tell she wanted more, needed more, but she was careful not to take too much. When she saw the baby formula behind the counter, her fingers twitched slightly before she shook her head and muttered, "She still has some left." Tom exchanged a glance with the cashier. "Just put it in the bag." Rachel turned back to him. "You don't have to." "I know," Tom interrupted gently. "But I want to." She swallowed hard but said nothing more. Once they were back outside, Rachel clutched the plastic bag of food like it was made of gold. She walked to her car, opening the driver's side door, and Tom caught his first real glimpse inside. The back seat was cluttered with a few bags of clothes, some empty water bottles, and a small pile of baby blankets. The car itself smelled faintly of baby powder and exhaustion. Rachel reached into the back and gently touched her baby's tiny hand. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Tom noticed how quickly Rachel grabbed one of the blankets and adjusted it over her daughter's small frame, making sure she was warm. She was struggling, but she wasn't careless. Tom exhaled, then took a step closer. "How long have you been living in your car?" Rachel froze. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, rubbing them together as if she could scrub the truth away. "A few weeks," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was supposed to be temporary, just until I figured things out." Tom frowned. "Figured what out?" She let out a hollow laugh. "My entire life, I guess." Rachel sat on the edge of the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I had a job," she continued. "Not a great one, but enough to get by. I was a receptionist at a small real estate office. Then my boss decided he didn't want to deal with the hassle of me having a baby. Said I was too distracted to be efficient. So he let me go." Tom clenched his jaw. "That's illegal." Rachel huffed. "Yeah, well, proving it takes lawyers' time and money. I don't have any of those." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but defiant. "I tried everything. I applied everywhere. Grocery stores, call centers, waitressing jobs. Nobody wanted to hire a single mother with no family to babysit." Tom ran a hand through his hair. He had heard stories like this before, but hearing it firsthand, seeing the weight of it in Rachel's expression, hit differently. "What about shelters?" he asked. Rachel flinched. "Tried. They were either full or had wait lists. The ones that had room," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Let's just say I didn't feel safe staying in them." Tom understood. Some shelters were good. Others were filled with danger, violence, drugs, desperation. A single mother with a baby? She'd be vulnerable. Rachel sighed. So I've been doing what I can. Parking in safe areas. Stretching what little money I have left. Trying to keep my daughter safe. She turned toward the back seat, her gaze softening. She doesn't know what's going on. She just knows Mommy's always here. Tom was quiet for a long moment. The weight of the situation settled heavily between them. Then he made a decision. Rachel, he said slowly. I want to help. Rachel immediately tensed. You already have. The food, the formula, it's more than enough. No, Tom said firmly. It's not enough. Rachel looked at him uncertain. Tom took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to offer would change everything. Come with me, he said. Let's get you and your daughter somewhere safe. Rachel's eyes widened. She looked at him like she wanted to believe him, but didn't dare. Because in her world, help like that didn't just appear. And if it did, it always came with a catch. Rachel stared at Tom, her fingers tightening around the plastic bag of food. Her whole body was tense, as if bracing for the other shoe to drop. What do you mean? Come with you, she asked, her voice wary. Tom exhaled, choosing his words carefully. I mean, let's get you out of this situation. A warm place to stay, a real meal, some help getting back on your feet. Rachel shook her head almost immediately. No, I can't. Tom frowned. Why not? Rachel let out a short, humorless laugh. Because nothing in life is free. Tom felt a pang of frustration, not at her, but at the world that had made her believe kindness always had a price. There's no catch, he said. I just don't think a mother and her baby should be sleeping in a car when there are other options. Rachel looked away, staring out at the nearly empty parking lot. I've heard that before. Tom stayed quiet, letting her continue. My ex, she finally said, her voice flat. He used to say he'd take care of me too. That I wouldn't have to worry about anything. Then one day, he decided taking care of me meant controlling me. Tom's expression darkened. He hurt you. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Not at first. It started small. Telling me where I could go, who I could talk to. Then the yelling, the threats. The first time he hit me, he swore it would never happen again. She let out a bitter laugh. It happened again. And again. Tom's jaw clenched. He had heard stories like this before. But hearing it firsthand, seeing the pain in Rachel's eyes, made it feel personal. I had to get out, she continued. But leaving wasn't as easy as I thought. He made sure I had nothing. No money, no support. I ended up here, doing whatever I could to survive. She turned to Tom, her eyes sharp now. So, forgive me if I don't trust when someone says they want to help. Tom took a slow breath. I get it. Rachel gave him a skeptical look. Do you? I do, he said firmly. You've been burned before. You've had people make promises and then break them. But Rachel, I'm not that guy. She let out another hollow laugh. That's what they all say. Tom didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Then hit the call button. Rachel tensed. What are you doing? Tom held up a hand, signaling her to wait. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. Hey Tom. What's up? Hey Karen, Tom said. I need a favor. Rachel narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms as she listened. Karen's voice turned curious. What kind of favor? I've got someone here who needs a place to stay, Tom said. A mom and her baby. I was wondering if you had room at your shelter. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Karen responded. For you. Always. We can take them in tonight. Tom smiled. You're the best. I'll bring them over soon. See you then. He ended the call and turned to Rachel. There, he said. A place to stay. No strings attached. Rachel stared at him, her expression unreadable. Who was that? Karen. She runs a shelter for women and children. It's safe, clean, and has resources to help people get back on their feet. Rachel chewed on her lip, still uncertain. And why are you doing this? Tom sighed. Because I can. And because I know what it's like to feel stuck. Rachel frowned. You? Tom Cruise. Tom chuckled. Yeah, me. I wasn't always famous, you know. I had my struggles too. And I got help when I needed it. Now I help where I can. Rachel was silent, processing his words. Finally, she looked back at her car, at her sleeping daughter. She let out a slow breath. Okay. Tom smiled. Good choice. But just as they were about to leave, the roar of an approaching vehicle made Rachel freeze. Tom noticed the sudden fear in her eyes. What is it? Rachel turned her head slowly toward the gas station entrance. A black truck had pulled in, its engine rumbling like a storm brewing. Tom saw her face pale. And then she whispered, "Oh no." Tom followed her gaze, his body tensing. A man stepped out of the truck, his movements slow and deliberate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with cold, calculating eyes. The kind of man who made his presence known just by standing there. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. That's him. Tom didn't need to ask who she meant. Her past had just caught up with her. Rachel's breath hitched as the man from the truck stepped forward, his heavy boots crunching against the pavement. The dim glow of the gas station lights cast long shadows across his face, but Rachel didn't need to see his expression to know exactly what it held: rage. Tom felt her tense beside him, her body stiff with fear. He didn't need to ask who the man was. He already knew. Rachel's ex. The man's gaze locked onto Rachel, then flicked toward Tom, sizing him up. His lips curled into a smirk. Well, well, he drawled, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. Look who finally decided to show her face. Rachel took an instinctive step back, clutching the plastic bag of food like it was a shield. Just leave, Darren, she said, her voice low but firm. There's nothing left to say. Darren let out a humorless chuckle. Oh, I think there's plenty to say. Like how you took off in the middle of the night with my kid. She's not your kid, Rachel snapped, her voice shaking. And you know why? Tom's eyes darted between them, his muscles coiling with quiet tension. He was ready to step in if this escalated. Darren ignored Rachel's words, his focus shifting to Tom. And who the hell are you supposed to be? He scoffed, eyeing Tom's casual hoodie and baseball cap. Some new boyfriend? Tom remained calm, unreadable. Just a guy who doesn't like seeing a mother and child living in fear. Darren's smirk vanished, replaced by a slow, creeping anger. That's so. He took a step closer, challenging. You got no idea what you're stepping into, buddy. Tom didn't move, didn't blink. He had faced men like Darren before. Men who mistook intimidation for power. Rachel, on the other hand, was trembling. She had seen this look in Darren's eyes before. The look he had right before he lashed out. Darren's fists clenched. Rachel, get in the truck. No, her defiance sent a fresh wave of anger across Darren's face. I said. You heard her. Darren's head snapped toward Tom. Rachel's heart pounded. Darren was dangerous. Unpredictable. And now Tom Cruise, one of the most recognizable men in the world, was standing between her and the monster she had spent months running from. Darren let out a sharp breath, his patience wearing thin. You think you're some kind of hero? His tone was mocking. That you're gonna swoop in and fix her life. Tom remained still, his expression unreadable. But his next words were slow, deliberate. No, he said. I think she's strong enough to fix her own life. I'm just making sure no one stands in her way. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Darren scoffed, shaking his head. You don't know a damn thing about us. I know enough. Tom's voice hardened. I know you're a coward who only feels powerful when he's hurting people who can't fight back. Darren's eyes darkened. His muscles twitched, his hands balling into fists. For a second, Rachel thought he might actually throw a punch. But before he could make a move, bright headlights flooded the parking lot, cutting through the tension like a knife. Darren flinched, turning toward the approaching vehicle. A sleek black SUV rolled in and came to a smooth stop a few feet away. The doors swung open, and two men in dark suits stepped out. Their movements were crisp, efficient. Rachel's eyes widened. Who? Tom's voice was calm. My people. Darren's expression flickered with confusion. He glanced between Tom and the two men, suddenly wary. What the hell is this? One of the men, a tall, sharp-featured guy in an earpiece, tilted his head slightly. Mr. Cruise, is there a problem here? Tom didn't take his eyes off Darren. Not anymore. Darren's gaze darted between them, his posture rigid. The air had shifted. He was no longer in control. Rachel saw it too. For the first time, Darren looked small. Tom took a slow step forward. Here's what's gonna happen, he said, his voice even. You're gonna get back in your truck, drive away, and never come near Rachel or her daughter again. Darren bristled. And if I don't? Tom's expression didn't change. Then we call the cops. And this time, you won't be able to talk your way out of it. Rachel's breath hitched. Tom knew. He knew Darren had avoided charges before. He had done his research. Darren's jaw clenched. He was outnumbered, outmatched. And he knew it. After a long, tense moment, he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This isn't over, he muttered. But he turned, walked back to his truck. Rachel didn't breathe until he climbed in and peeled out of the parking lot, his tires screeching against the pavement. The silence left behind was deafening. Rachel felt her legs go weak. Tom caught her before she could collapse. It's okay, he murmured. It's over. But even as he said the words, Rachel knew. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Rachel stood frozen, her pulse still racing from the confrontation. The cold night air pressed against her skin, but all she could feel was the tremor in her hands. Darren was gone for now, but she knew him well enough to understand that men like him didn't just disappear. Tom sensed her hesitation. He gave her a steady look, his voice quiet but firm. You're safe, Rachel. He's not coming back. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But fear had been her shadow for so long that the thought of freedom felt foreign, almost impossible. Tom gestured toward the black SUV. Come on. Let's get you and Mia somewhere safe. Rachel hesitated, glancing at the vehicle. The men who had arrived with Tom stood at a respectful distance, watching, waiting. These weren't just security guys. They were professionals. She wasn't sure what world Tom Cruise lived in, but it was far removed from the one she had been surviving in. Still, something inside her whispered that this was the moment. The moment to step forward, to trust. She nodded. Carefully, Tom reached for Mia, who had been sleeping against Rachel's chest, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed. As he cradled the tiny girl in his arms, Rachel saw something shift in his expression. He looked down at Mia with a quiet reverence, his fingers gently brushing against her tiny hand. Rachel swallowed the lump in her throat. Why are you doing this? Tom met her gaze. Because I can. It was such a simple answer. No grand speech, no expectations. Just a truth that felt so rare in her world. A few minutes later, they were in the SUV, the warmth of the leather seats making Rachel realize just how cold she had been. She wrapped her arms around herself as the driver pulled onto the main road. For the first time in a long time, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. As the city lights blurred past, she glanced at Tom, who was focused on Mia, gently rocking her in his arms. Where are we going? She asked. Tom looked over at her. Somewhere you can finally breathe. Rachel exhaled slowly, sinking into the seat. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a life she had never dared to dream of. The SUV glided through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, far away from the gas station and the confrontation that had nearly unraveled Rachel's world. Inside the vehicle, a fragile peace settled between them. The weight of fear still clung to Rachel, but something else had begun to take root. A cautious hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. Tom sat beside her, his attention on Mia, who had drifted into a peaceful sleep in his arms. The way he held her, with such care and gentleness, made Rachel's heart clench. It had been so long since she'd seen anyone look at her daughter with anything other than pity or disinterest. Rachel swallowed hard, finally breaking the silence. I don't understand why you're doing all this. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. You don't even know us. Tom looked at her, his blue eyes steady, unwavering. Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's been fighting too long without help. He paused. And I know what it means to step in when it matters. Rachel turned away, staring out the window. For so long, she had relied on herself, believing no one would ever truly care. But Tom's words, simple as they were, struck something deep inside her. The SUV slowed as they approached a long, winding driveway, leading to an elegant home perched on the hills. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The house wasn't just big, it was something out of a dream. Clean lines, warm lighting, and a breathtaking view of the city below. We're staying here, she asked, stunned. For now, Tom said. Until we figure out something more permanent. The driver parked smoothly, And within moments, the security team had already stepped out, scanning the area before giving a discreet nod to Tom. He shifted Mia carefully, then opened the door, gesturing for Rachel to follow. She hesitated at the doorstep. "I don't belong in a place like this." Tom turned, his expression serious. "Rachel, you've spent too much time believing you don't deserve good things. That stops now." She blinked, his words hitting harder than she expected. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around her instantly. It wasn't the cold, lifeless luxury she had always imagined celebrity homes to be. Instead, it felt lived in. A place that carried stories, memories. The walls were lined with framed photos. Not of fame or red carpets, but of people. Friends, family. Rachel took it all in as Tom led her toward a cozy sitting area. Setting Mia down gently in a bassinet one of his staff had already placed by the couch. "She can rest here," Tom said softly. "And so can you." Rachel sank onto the couch, exhaustion pressing down on her all at once. It had been too long since she had let herself relax, even for a moment. Tom sat across from her, watching her carefully. "You don't have to tell me everything right now. But if you want help, I need to know what we're up against." Rachel hesitated, old instincts screaming at her to keep everything inside. But for the first time in years, she felt safe. She took a deep breath and finally began to speak. "Darren wasn't always like this," she admitted. "At least, I didn't think he was." She wrung her hands together. "At first he was charming, said all the right things. But then things changed. It started with small things. Little insults. Controlling where I went, who I talked to. Then it got worse." Tom listened intently, not interrupting. Rachel swallowed. "I tried to leave so many times. But he always found a way to pull me back. And when I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I knew I couldn't raise a child in that kind of life." Tom's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "The night I left, I knew if I didn't go then I never would. I took Mia, whatever cash I had, and I ran." She let out a shaky breath. "But running only got me so far. And eventually, I ended up here. In a car. With nothing." A heavy silence stretched between them. Tom leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You did what you had to do to survive. But now, you don't have to do it alone." Rachel looked at him, emotions swirling in her eyes. "Why do you even care?" Tom's voice was soft but firm. "Because I've seen too many people turn their backs when they had the power to help. I won't be one of them." A lump formed in Rachel's throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Hope. And for the first time, she let herself believe. Maybe she wasn't alone anymore. The morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows, casting a golden glow over the living room. Rachel stirred awake, disoriented for a moment before remembering. She wasn't in her car. She wasn't curled up in the back seat, clutching Mia for warmth. She was here. Safe. Across the room, Mia lay peacefully in the bassinet, her tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The sight sent a wave of relief washing over Rachel. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Tom stood there, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Figured you could use one." Rachel sat up, rubbing her tired eyes before taking the mug. "I don't even know how to thank you," she admitted. "For all of this." Tom sat across from her, sipping his coffee. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just take the help. And when you're in a position to pass it on." Rachel nodded slowly, absorbing his words. For so long, she had been running, surviving. But maybe now she could start building. Over the next few days, Tom's team worked to help Rachel secure a safe place to live. Legal assistance, financial support, even job opportunities. Things she never thought possible suddenly became real options. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in forever, she wasn't afraid. One evening, as she sat on the terrace overlooking the city, Tom joined her. "So what's next?" he asked. Rachel exhaled, watching the horizon. "I want to build a life for Mia. One where she never has to know what it's like to be afraid." She turned to Tom. "And I want to help other women like me. There are so many out there who have no way out." A smile played at the corner of Tom's lips. "That's a good goal." Rachel smiled back. "It's more than a goal. It's a promise." As the stars blinked to life in the sky above, Rachel realized something. Her past no longer defined her. Her future was hers to create. And for the first time, she truly believed she was free. Moral of the story: a single act of kindness can change a life. When we have the power to help, we should. Because we never know who desperately needs a second chance.